let me say something you might need to hear today. You don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to chase to be seen. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. Say nothing. Do nothing. Let silence speak for you. Because when someone walks away from you, pulls back, or plays games with your heart, they expect you to come running. They expect you to try harder, to prove your worth, to show them that you're still there. Why? Because that's what people do when they're afraid to be alone. But you're not her anymore. You're not in that place where your self-worth hangs on someone else's attention. You're not waiting for crumbs, hoping someone finally realizes what they had when it's too late. You're evolving. You're reclaiming your power. When a man takes you for granted, ignores you, disrespects your love, or plays with your time, the greatest response is silence. Not the silence of bitterness, not revenge, not manipulation, but the silence of dignity. That silence is you drawing a line. It says, I will not beg for what I deserve. I will not lower myself to remind you of my value. If you can't see it, that's your loss, not mine. And it hurts him more than you think. You see, people feel the weight of your absence when they got used to your presence. He'll start to notice when the text doesn't come, when the calls stop, when the warmth disappears. Because love that is pure, consistent, and honest becomes a part of someone's emotional rhythm. And when that rhythm breaks, the silence becomes deafening. Letting someone feel the pain of losing you isn't cruel. It's clarity. It's a moment where they meet the consequence of their choices. It's where they finally feel what they've been numb-tob, the fact that you were a gift they misused, and gifts don't keep showing up after they've been dismissed. Yes, it's hard to walk away. It's hard to stay silent when all you want is answers, closure, or one more try. But silence doesn't mean weakness. Silence doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've chosen yourself, your peace, self-worth, your healing. And maybe, just maybe, he'll wake up. Maybe he'll realize what he lost. Maybe he'll change. But you're not staying silent for that outcome. You're staying silent for you. To remember your value, to rebuild your confidence, to create space for someone who won't need silence to finally understand your worth. So let him feel the pain of losing you, not because you want him to suffer, but because it's the only way he might finally understand the depth of your presence. And more importantly, so you remember that your power never came from who stayed or who left. It came from how deeply you learned to stand, whole, proud, and silent in your own worth. Silence is your loudest boundary. It speaks in ways words never can. When someone disrespects your time, your love, or your presence, silence becomes your most powerful answer. You don't need to argue, plead, or explain yourself to someone who already knows what they're doing. You simply stop giving them access to your energy. That's the power of silence. It's not loud, but it's commanding. It tells the other person, I'm not here to convince you. I'm not here to negotiate my worth. Because when you start talking just to be heard, you often lose the strength behind what you're trying to say. But when you fall back and go quiet, that quietness creates space. That space becomes uncomfortable for the one who misused you, and it forces them to reflect, or at the very least, notice. When you set a boundary, you're saying, this is what I will accept. This is what I won't. But sometimes people cross those boundaries, not because they didn't see them, but because they didn't believe there would be a consequence. That's where silence becomes a statement. It's not about shutting someone out. It's about turning inward and protecting your peace. You've already spoken. You've already showed up. You've already given chances. And when someone still chooses to play with your emotions, you stop talking. You stop chasing. You stop reminding them of how good you were. You let them sit in the absence they created. That silence becomes your boundary. That silence becomes your message. People don't always listen to what you say. They respond to how you act. So if your words say, I'm done, but your actions keep reaching back, texting in, then your boundary isn't real to them. But when your actions align with your silence, it sends a shockwave. It catches them off guard because they expected you to come back. They thought you'd break first. They assumed you'd reach out, as you always did. But this time, you didn't. And in that stillness, they hear everything they need to hear. Silence is misunderstood. Some think it's passive, weak, or cold, but it's actually one of the most intentional choices you can make. It requires restraint. It demands emotional control. Because staying silent when you have every reason to speak is not easy. Especially when your heart is still hurting. Especially when your mind is screaming for closure. But that silence isn't just about them. It's about you. It's about choosing not to participate in a dynamic that drains you. It's about stepping away from people who only listen when it's convenient for them. And here's the truth. When someone truly values you, they won't let silence be the final word. They won't wait until you go quiet to start appreciating you. They won't test how far they can push before you break. But when someone doesn't respect you, they will test those boundaries over and over. That's why silence becomes necessary. It's the moment you stop reacting and start reclaiming your emotional space. It's the shift from being someone who begs to be understood to someone who chooses peace over chaos. It's not about cutting people off for the sake of ego. It's about recognizing when isn't one meeting where you deserve to be met. And instead of explaining that for the 100th time, you simply go quiet. You retreat not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. Because not everyone deserves an explanation. Not everyone earns your continued energy. And the more you allow people to cross your boundaries without consequence, the more you teach them how to treat you. So silence becomes your reset. It becomes the moment you stop fighting to prove your worth. It becomes your protection. You no longer over-explain, over-apologize, or overgive. You observe. You distance. You allow someone to feel the impact of your absence. You let them feel what it's like to no longer have your comfort, your attention, your softness. And in doing so, you teach them more about you than any words ever could. Chasing love proves nothing but your own fear of being alone. When you find yourself constantly reaching, constantly trying, constantly hoping someone sees your worth, what you're really doing is running from your own discomfort. You're not always chasing love because it's deep or true. You're chasing it because without it, you feel empty. And that's where the real truth begins. That fear of being alone, of not being chosen, of not being enough unless someone confirms it. That fear is what drives so many of your actions. But the more you chase someone who's not meeting you halfway, the more you lose sight of yourself. You start bending your standards, shrinking your needs, explaining yourself more than necessary. You become someone who is trying to earn love rather than simply receive it. Love is not something you have to convince someone to give you. Real love doesn't need to be begged for. When it's real, it shows up, it stays, it chooses you back. If you're always the one trying, always the one initiating, always the one forgiving without repair, then what you're in isn't love. It's survival in disguise. It's the silent voice inside that says, if I stop chasing, I'll lose them. But the truth is, if they were truly yours, you wouldn't have to chase in the first place. We live in a world that praises hustle and effort, even in relationships. But there's a line between effort and self-abandonment. There's a line between showing someone you care and trying to rescue someone who keeps showing you they're not ready. Every time you chase love that hurts, love that hides, love that takes but rarely gives, what you're really doing is trying to fill a void that isn't meant to be filled by someone else. And that void will only grow the more you ignore it. You see, the more you chase, the more power you give away. You give them permission to dictate the rhythm of the connection. You give them control over how much love you receive. You begin to wait. You wait for their mood. You wait for their attention. You wait for a message that makes you feel enough for a moment, only to fall back into the silence that follows. That cycle isn't love. It's a trap, and deep down you know it. You just keep hoping this time will be different. That maybe if you love harder, or stay longer, or fix more, it will finally work. But that kind of love asks you to lose yourself to keep someone else. And that's not love. That's fear. You don't have to run after someone to prove you're lovable. You don't have to overextend just to be accepted. The right person doesn't want your exhaustion. They want your presence. They want your peace, not your panic. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop. To stop calling. Stop checking. Stop wondering. To give space and see what happens when you let go. When you stop running towards someone who keeps standing still, that's when the truth reveals itself. The hardest part about not chasing is sitting with the silence. It forces you to face what's been underneath the entire time. Your own woods, your own history, your own beliefs about what love should feel like. And that's why people chase. Because doing the inner work is hard. It's confronting. It means owning the fact that part of you feels unworthy unless someone is clinging to you back. But healing begins when you stop chasing people who were never meant to stay, when you stop needing someone to complete you and start becoming whole on your own. No one teaches us how to be alone. No one shows us how to sit with our thoughts, our desires, our loneliness. But that's where your strength is born, in the quiet moments where you don't reach for a distraction, where you don't beg for someone's attention to feel good about yourself. That's where you begin to heal. That's where you stop proving and start becoming, and from that place, the love you attract will not feel like a race or a test or a fight to be seen. It will feel calm. It will feel mutual. It will feel like home, not a chase. Your absence teaches him what your presence truly meant. Sometimes we forget how deeply our presence impacts someone until we remove it. We get so used to being there, to showing up, to answering the texts, making the calls, initiating the effort, that our presence becomes expected. It becomes the norm, not a privilege. And when someone begins to take that presence for granted, it's often because they've never had to live without it. They don't feel the weight of what you bring because it's always there. Your attention, your softness, your loyalty, your energy. It's always within reach, and that comfort makes people forget that access is not a guarantee. But when you finally step back, when you stop being available, when you go quiet and out of spite but out of clarity, something shifts. Suddenly, what they thought was always going to be there isn't anymore. They notice the gap, they feel the silence. And in that space, reality hits. Your presence wasn't just convenient, it was valuable. It brought something unique into their life. It gave warmth, stability, reassurance, maybe even joy. And now, without it, they're left to realize what they had. Not because you told them, not because you reminded them, but because you removed yourself and allowed the absence to speak for itself. There's a truth most people don't want to admitting. People often don't realize how much they needed you until they no longer have you. They don't see the comfort of your consistency until it's gone. They don't feel the emotional support you gave them until there's no one to lean on anymore. They don't hear your voice in the same way until there's nothing left to listen to. And this isn't about manipulation. It's not about playing games. It's about understanding your worth and refusing to stay where you're not appreciated. When you are always available, always forgiving, always giving another chance, people grow comfortable. They start to assume your forgiveness is endless, your love is unconditional in the wrong ways, and your presence is permanent no matter how they behave. But it's not. And it shouldn't be. Because love is a privilege, not a possession. And when someone treats you like an option, like something that can be put on hold or taken for granted, the most powerful thing you can do is leave them with the silence of your absence. And it hurts them in ways you'll never have to say. It shows up in their day-to-day life, in the quiet hours, in the empty phone screens, in the conversations that feel dull without your energy in them. They'll look for the same feeling in other people and come up short. They'll try to distract themselves and still feel the void. Because what you gave wasn't just surface-level attention. It was connection, it was presence, it was real, and real can't be replaced. Even if they don't say it, even if they don't show it, even if their ego won't let them admit it, they feel it. Your absence teaches lessons your presence never could. Your silence becomes the mirror they have to face. And whether or not they learn from it isn't your responsibility. What matters is that you stopped showing up where you weren't being seen. You stopped pouring into a cup that had no intention of pouring back. And in doing so, you reminded yourself of your value. There's something powerful about choosing to walk away quietly, not slamming doors, not writing long paragraphs trying to make them understand, but simply deciding that your presence is no longer a gift you'll offer to someone who doesn't know how to receive it. And when they feel that shift, when the rhythm of their life loses the beat of your presence, they'll remember. They may not admit it, but they'll remember. Because when something real leaves, it echoes, it lingers, it changes the atmosphere, and they'll feel the difference between your presence and your absence in ways they never expected. Let your dignity speak louder than your need for closure. There comes a point where continuing to explain yourself becomes a form of self-betrayal. You've said enough, done enough, waited long enough, and still they didn't change, still they didn't step up. Still, they can't or wouldn't give you what you needed. And now you're standing at the edge of that emotional cliff, asking yourself if you should say more, try harder, send one last message, or give one final plea. But the truth is, you already have your answer. It's just not the one you wanted. And it hurts. It hurts to walk away without resolution. It hurts to not hear an apology, to not get acknowledgement, to not be told you were right to feel what you felt. But holding on to your dignity means learning to live with unanswered questions. It means giving up the fight to be understood by someone who was never willing to see you clearly in the first place. You don't have to scream to be heard. You don't have to beg to be validated. Your truth is still your truth, even if they never admit it. You can choose silence over explanation. You can choose grace over reaction. You can choose to let go not because it feels good, but because it respects you. When you chase closure, you keep handing your peace to someone who's already proven they don't know what to do with it. You keep handing them pen and asking them to rewrite the ending in a way that makes you feel better. But sometimes the ending doesn't come with a satisfying conclusion. Sometimes the other person never realizes what they did. Sometimes they move on like nothing happened, and your need for closure turns into a chain that keeps you stuck. That's where dignity steps in. Dignity doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care about yourself enough to stop forcing what's not meant for you. It means you're done justifying your pain to someone who never took the time to understand it. It means you're willing to walk away, not because you want to, but because it's the only path left that still honors your worth. When you let your dignity speak, it says more than 100 texts ever could. It says you know who you are. It says you're not going to break yourself apart trying to fix someone else's indifference. It says you've finally chosen you. Closure doesn't always come in a conversation. Sometimes it comes in silence, in choosing not to respond, in choosing not to ask, in choosing to delete the draft instead of sending it, in taking a breath instead of reopening a wound. That silence is not weakness. It's wisdom. It's the recognition that no amount of talking can change someone who doesn't want to change. It's the acceptance that your peace matters more than their explanation. You don't need them to confirm what you already feel. You don't need their validation to make your experience real. You were hurt. You were disappointed. You were led on, misunderstood, mistreated, or ignored. That happened. That's your reality. And no response from them will erase that. So why keep reaching for it? Let your dignity carry you through the silence. Let it remind you that you don't need to convince anyone of your value. Let it pull you back from the temptation to reopen conversations that only leave you emptier. You are allowed to walk away quietly. You are allowed to protect your heart by not reopening the door. You are allowed to choose distance over drama. That's not giving up. That's growing up. That's healing. That's reclaiming power over what you allow into your life. There's strength in not reacting. There's power in not proving. There's peace in knowing you've done all you could. And now it's time to release what no longer respects you. Closure is a gift you can give yourself the moment you stop demanding it from someone else. When you let go of needing them to make it right, you create space for something better, something healthier, something that doesn't require you to abandon yourself just to feel seen. And that kind of peace begins with dignity. Quiet, unwavering dignity that tells the world you are no longer available for anything that makes you question your worth. Silence isn't revenge, it's self-respect. There's a difference between walking away to hurt someone and walking away to heal yourself. Too often, silence is misunderstood. People think that if you go quiet, you're trying to punish the other person, trying to make them miss you, trying to play a game. But that's not what this is about. Choosing silence, choosing to step back, choosing to no longer engage is not about making someone suffer. It's about protecting your energy. It's about recognizing when a conversation is no longer serving you, when the dynamic has become one side, and when continuing to talk only brings more confusion than clarity. Silence is not about control. It's about boundaries. You reach a point where continuing to speak feels like pouring water into a cup with no bottom. No matter how much you give, nothing changes. You keep explaining your feelings, but they're not heard. You keep trying to make things right, but you're the only one trying. You keep showing up emotionally, but you're met with distance, excuses, or indifference. That's when silence becomes necessary. Not because you want to hurt the other person, but because you can't hurting yourself by staying in something that keeps wounding you. Silence isn't cold. It's clarity. It's what happens when you finally understand that the more you speak, the less you're respected. That the more you reach, the further they pull away. And when you start honoring your self-worth, you realize you don't have to respond to everything. You don't have to defend yourself to someone who already made up their mind. You don't have to explain your heart to someone who's not listening. You don't have to chase conversations that leave you feeling smaller than when you started them. That's not growth. That's emotional exhaustion, and silence is how you step out of that pattern. It's how you stop bleeding for people who never brought you a bandage. It's how you begin the process of coming back to yourself. People who truly care about you won't need silence to understand your value. They won't push you so far that you feel you have no choice but to shut down. But when someone has shown you through their actions or their inconsistency that your voice doesn't matter to them, the most respectful thing you can do for yourself is go quiet. Not to punish them, but to protect yourself from further disappointment. Silence is often the answer when words have been wasted. When every conversation starts to feel like a repeat of the last, when you find yourself saying the same things over and over again, hoping for a different outcome, silence steps in and says, enough. It doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you've stopped feeling. In fact, it often means you care too much, and caring so deeply without any return has finally drained you. You're not being passive-aggressive. You're not being spiteful. You're being wise. You're giving yourself permission to pause, to breathe, to create space. And in that space, something powerful happens. You begin to reconnect with yourself. You begin to hear your own thoughts again without the noise of needing to be understood by someone else. You begin to feel grounded instead of scattered, peaceful instead of reactive. Sometimes silence is the most honest expression of how you feel, because the truth is you've said it all, you've done what you could, and now continuing to speak only pulls you further from the version of yourself that you're trying to grow into. That version of you doesn't chase. That version of you doesn't beg. That version of you doesn't stay where love has become confusion. Silence becomes the path to healing. It creates the boundary you need to finally break the cycle. It invites reflection. It allows emotions to settle. And more importantly, it sends a message, not to them, but to you, that your peace matters more than their validation. The decision to go silent isn't easy. It's often filled with guilt, second-guessing, and the temptation to reach out one more time. But deep down, you know what silence means for you. It means you've stopped fighting for something that isn't fighting for you. It means you've stopped lowering your standards to keep someone who wouldn't raise theirs. It means you've stopped showing up for a connection that left you empty. And most importantly, it means you've finally chosen to listen to the voice inside that says enough. You don't lose value when someone fails to recognize it. It's easy to forget this when you're emotionally invested in someone who doesn't see your worth. When they pull away, act indifferent, or treat you like an option, it can make you question everything about yourself. You begin wondering if you weren't enough, if you should have done more, if you could have said something different. You start rewinding moments in your mind, searching for where things shifted, blaming yourself for someone else's inability to appreciate you. But their lack of recognition doesn't diminish your value. It only reveals their limitations. Just because someone can't see your light doesn't mean you're not shining. You could be the most supportive, loyal, kind-hearted person in the room, and if the other person isn't capable of receiving love or recognizing goodness, they will overlook it. That doesn't make you less. That doesn't mean your love was wasted. Sometimes people are too distracted, too emotionally unavailable, or too broken to hold something healthy in their hands. You don't lose your essence because someone chose not to value it. Your worth is not a negotiation. It's not something that rises and falls based on who decides to see it. You have to remember that some people only know how to connect through chaos. They don't recognize calm. They misinterpret consistency as boring. They mistake your peace for passivity. And instead of appreciating the depth of your emotional intelligence, they chase after situations that validate their wounds. That's not your fault. You were showing up with truth, with care, with presence. But if someone is addicted to emotional highs and drama, they won't know what to do with stability. And that has nothing to do with you. It's a reflection of their inner world, not a reflection of your value. Rejection is painful, but it's also redirection. When someone fails to see you, it hurts. But it also clears the space for someone who will. Someone who doesn't need convincing, who doesn't make you question your place in their life. Someone who matches your energy, respects your presence, and brings the same intention to the connection. But you can't make room for that kind of love if you're still chasing after people who made you feel small. You don't need to shrink for someone to like you. You don't need to become more quiet, more agreeable, less emotional just to be accepted. You are not too much. You are not too sensitive. You are not too anything for the right person. When someone doesn't value you, it's easy to internalize that pain. But their behavior doesn't get to define who you are. You define that. You define it by how you speak to yourself in the aftermath, by how you pick yourself up, how you refuse to allow someone's rejection to turn into your self-rejection. You remind yourself that you were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. You remind yourself that being misunderstood doesn't mean you're flawed. It means the other person didn't have the capacity or maturity to meet you where you are. Sometimes people won't get it. They won't get your love, your loyalty, your spirit. They won't understand your heart because they've never done the work to understand their own. And that disconnect isn't a sign that you're wrong for loving deeply. It's a sign that they weren't ready for it. So don't let that rejection be the mirror you use to see yourself. Look deeper. Look at your kindness, your effort, your vulnerability. Look at the courage it takes to open up even after you've been hurt. That's strength, beauty, that's value. You don't need their recognition to be enough. You don't need their approval to feel secure. The moment you stop tying your self-worth to someone else's behavior is the moment you begin to feel free. Free to walk away. Free to stand tall. Free to know that being overlooked is not a reflection of who you are. It's a reflection of who they are not. You were never invisible. They just chose not to look closely. You were never unworthy. They just didn't have the wisdom to appreciate what was right in front of them. And that's their loss to carry, not yours.